Welcome to Fly on the Wall podcast. I'm your host, Chris Sonksen, CEO and founder of Church Boom. Here you get to sit in on a live coaching session as I coach pastors through the ministry challenges we all face. If you find this podcast helpful, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share. Hey, welcome to today's podcast with my buddy Chad, and we're talking today with Chad about dealing with staff tension. If you've got leadership in your church, staff in your church, it's guaranteed that at some point or another, you're going to have tension, and we talk about that in a very in-depth way. You're going to love the conversation. I want to encourage you to go to churchboom.org. We have a lot of things to offer there, resources and a lot of different initiatives and programs that could really help you. But there's one I want you to really focus on, and that's the Church Boom Network. I don't think pastors should do church alone. About 7-8 years ago, there was a study done that 37% of all pastors belong to a network. That's down to 19% now. Don't do church alone. Become part of a network. And we have a Church Boom network just for you. It's a place where you can build friendships, you can get ongoing training and help, a place where we come together live and in person 1 to 2 times per year. You will love it. Go to churchboom.org and check out the Church Boom network. But let's jump now into the conversation with my buddy, Pastor Chad. Well, good to have you on here today on the podcast, man. How can I serve you? What's on your mind?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Yeah, I just, I thought I would just pick your brain on, helping lead pastors in understanding just like the whole concept relationally, what that relationship between lead pastor and, their executive pastor looks like. I think that obviously those relationships are very important, and so we want to make sure that the speed of decision making and knowing lanes and where those lanes are for each role and how important they are, but helping that relationship really to understand how it can actually work together and in unison to accomplish the vision and to move the ministry forward in a smooth way.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Man, it's a great question because I've seen guys that are lead pastors and their church grows to a certain level and they bring in an executive pastor. Now, you obviously are not doing that when your church is 120, but as you grow, you 400, 500, 700, whatever, you bring in this executive pastor. And there is almost always, there is tension. Because the lead pastor, and especially if the lead pastor it's their first time having an executive pastor, there's tension. I think there's always going to be tension, and you kind of work through that and you figure your lanes out. But when it's your first time doing it as a lead pastor, man, you're not sure, like, do I let go of that? Do I not let go of that? Do I give this up? Do I not give this up? That's one big problem. So they're not, sometimes it's unsure of who's letting go of what. Sometimes there's fear. Can I really trust this person? Look, I grew this thing and now I'm trusting this person with the thing that, honestly, this executive pastor can leave in 3 years and go be an executive pastor somewhere else and leave me a mess. So there's trust issues, there's fear issues, there's insecurity issues. A lot of those issues come into play when you're talking about the relationship between the lead pastor and the executive pastor. Again, I think it's always there to some degree, but it's really heightened in the beginning of the relationship with the lead pastor and an executive pastor. Definitely heightened in those times. So one of the things I would say is there needs to be extreme clarity on authority versus responsibility. Okay, if I'm the lead pastor and you're my executive pastor, what is your responsibility? And have I given you the proper authority to that responsibility? That's where a lot of tension comes in. Because if I give you a lot of responsibility, but then I don't give you the authority to do it, then I'm holding you responsible for something you have no authority over, which is completely frustrating and is inevitably going to make you look bad. And so my job, if I'm the lead pastor and you're the executive pastor, just role-playing here, I've got to say, okay, Chad, here's all the different parts of responsibility you have, but then I have to release that authority over to you. And if I don't give you authority that matches responsibility, it's going to end up in a lot of tension between us, and it's going to end up in a lot of unmet expectations. So that's a big part. Authority and responsibility have to match. Now, what a executive pastor does and does not do, that I think that needs to be set up front and then kind of gets a little bit worked out over time. If I'm a lead pastor, I'm guarding the vision. No one's going to reshape the vision. Okay, the vision's not for sale. Secondly, I'm gonna guard the culture of the church. I don't want you having hands on that. Where we're headed in the vision and where we're headed in the culture. Okay, I want you to build the team and build systems towards that, but the vision and the culture, as a lead pastor, I would be looking at you saying those are off ground, those are off limits. We're not changing the vision because you don't like it, and we're not changing the culture because it doesn't match whatever you think needs to happen. I need you to create system, strategies, and structure that support the vision and the culture of what I'm doing. And so that's where that has to come. But I would again, there's different lines, and there's no perfect formula, because what an executive pastor does at 500 might be different than what he does at 2,000. As a matter of fact, at 2,000, there might be 2 executive pastors. And now all of a sudden, the first one is moved over completely into a different lane. So there's no perfect sort of recipe. Okay, this does 5 things, and this one does 5 things. Like, that's not how it works. There has to be an agreement up front, and then there has to be conversation to make sure that the tension is as limited as possible. But authority and responsibility have to match. Vision and culture stays in the corner of the lead pastor. Strategy, structure, systems, that most of that should most likely be in the executive pastor's lane, but it has to support what the pastor's doing and where he's headed. Decision making, I think that's important. That goes back to authority, Chad. It's like, I can't give you responsibility and then not give you the authority to carry out that responsibility. And under that authority, you could put the word decision making. I can't give you the responsibility and then not give you the authority to make the decision. If I give you the authority if I don't give you the authority to make the decision, again, I'm holding you responsible for something you don't even have a thumb over. You don't even have responsibility over. So, or decision making over. So, you said the word decision making in the question. I would put that under the category of authority. It's the same thing. You have the authority to make the decision. But if your responsibility is here and your authority and decision making is here, that's where the frustration lies.
Yeah.
And it has to match. You got to get that to match always in that relationship between lead pastor and executive pastor.
Yeah, that's great. What would you just say as a general rule? Because I know this looks different for every church and every ministry. But just kind of like, what are some things in church growth would be maybe indicators that it's time to bring in an executive pastor onto the team?
You mean the first executive pastor?
Yeah, your first one. Like if they don't already have one.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's a great thought. I don't think it's too early in the game, 100, 200, anything like that. I think once you start getting to 4, 5, 600, I think you're starting to bring one in. The reason you're starting to bring one in is because the pastor's starting to notice he's getting way too much into the weeds. And his focus as the lead pastor has to change. He has to become more missional minded. He's got to be working with high-level leaders, high-capacity givers, high-capacity talent people. He's got to be working with vision. He's got to be working with communication. He's got to be moving the church forward. He's got to be kind of operating at that 10,000 or 30,000 foot level. The pastor has to be able to make that jump and start working at that level. And when the church reaches a certain size and the pastor's starting to notice, man, I'm getting in the weeds too much. Staff's not getting the attention they need. I'm not being able to monitor all the different ministries. I'm not being able to fine-tune structure, strategy, systems, all that, and I'm getting pulled into the weeds. That's when he needs to make the change. Very difficult. because he's used to having hands in everything, number one. Secondly, very difficult because his schedule should start changing. Where he focuses changes. Where he spends his time changes. How he spends his time changes. Who he spends his time with changes. That's where some guys have a very difficulty doing that. And so I would say that's when you kind of notice it, but you have to know when you're making that switch, that you got to know that you're letting go and that you're going to be okay. And if you're bringing on someone you don't trust, then you shouldn't be bringing them on. And you got to trust the person. So that's how I would look at that. Those are kind of the indicators for me.
Yeah, that's great. So let's just say it's time you bring on that that first executive pastor. Define those roles, define the responsibilities, the authority, things that we've been talking about, and so forth. Let's just say now you're the one that's coming in to help support the vision in whatever role that you hold. You're supportive in your ministry to the vision of the lead pastor and things of that sort. What would be just some wisdom from you on how you honorably lead from that place?
Oh, as the executive pastor.
Yeah, as an executive
Leading.
pastor,
Okay.
how do you honorably lead in supporting the vision, and supporting the team?
Yeah. Several things, and in no particular order. I think the executive pastor has to have an immense amount of loyalty to the pastor. Remember, you've heard me say this before. Faithfulness says, I won't talk bad about you. Loyalty says, I won't let anybody else talk bad about you. I think that our body language, the expressions on our face, things like that, can give away disloyalty. So we would say in our heart and with truth, I didn't say anything bad, but you didn't defend. I didn't think anything bad. Yeah, but you kind of, you made it clear that you had opinions and you wanted. I see that all the time. Someone will say something and you're like, well, I got an opinion. You know what? Never mind. I'll just leave it right there. Well, dude, you just told the person you had an opinion and it wasn't good. Now, when you're cornered, hey, did you say anything? No, I didn't say anything. That's true. But you gave it away. And I think that people do that. And I think as an executive pastor, you can't do that. Silence gives the illusion of approval. And as a executive pastor, if there's a situation that's a little negative with someone in the lobby or a staff member, if you don't say anything, you can honestly say, I didn't say a word. But you also didn't come back and say something different. You also didn't say, well, I was at a church doing a rescue Sunday at a church recently, and doing a rescue Sunday. And I know the pastor, not real well, but I know him. I did the rescue Sunday, and it was all great. We did a few services, and in between services, someone comes up and complains about the pastor to me. He doesn't allow this. I've got this heart for this. I got this heart for this ministry, and he doesn't allow it. Okay. And I told him, first of all, you shouldn't be speaking to me because my loyalty lies with him. He's the lead pastor. Secondly, if you have a problem, you need to go to him. I don't even know who this person was, but I know this much. I didn't want my eyes, my expression, my body language or my silence to give off any indication that I even somewhat agreed with them. Even if I did, I don't want to give off any indication. And I think that executive pastor, you got to be really careful, and your loyalty comes from that. And to me, that is the top thing. Secondly is, I would say, transparency. I think not having transparency is, I think, unhealthy. Because you're not being honest and you're not being real with the pastor, and you're not talking about being rude. You're not talking about being mean-spirited. You're not talking about being disrespectful, but you're being very respectful, but you're saying, hey, I just want to share my heart. This is a tension that I feel in our relationship. This is a tension I think the staff is feeling, and I just want to share this because I care about you and I always have your back. Here's a couple things I've noticed. You got to be able to have those transparent conversations. You've probably heard me say that, the whole care and candor. If you have care, but you don't have candor, that's always dysfunctional. All I do is care and tell the pastor how great he is. All I do is care about my staff. I'm never honest with them, never real with them, never transparent with them. Just care, 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 love, 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 shower, shower, shower with encouragement, which is great. But I'm never have an honest conversation with them. If you have care, but you minus candor, you have dysfunction. Now flip it the other way, Chad. If you have candor, but you don't have care, totally opposite. You have total candor, but you don't have care, you have distance. Think about that. If you have candor, you're totally honest all the time, but you don't have any care, you have distance. In other words, I don't want to set an appointment with Chad because I know he's just going to rip me. I don't want to set an appointment with Chad. I know he's just going to tell me what I'm doing wrong. So if you have care, but you don't have any candor, all you have is dysfunction because there's no honesty there. There's no growing with each other. There's no Matthew 18, go to your brother at once. It's artificial harmony. But then if you have candor, but you don't have any care, all you have is distance. Now, if you have care and candor, which is important, care and candor, then you have development. You have a chance to develop that relationship. I think that you have to have care as an executive pastor and as a lead pastor, all of it in that relationship, but you also have to have candor. That's respectfully and kindly, but you got to have it. Otherwise, all you're going to have is distance or dysfunction.
Yeah, that's so good.
So those things have to work together. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's so good. Yeah, and we've had these conversations before too, but just kind of talking about that transparency and that honesty and how important that is. I've heard you say that you don't need necessarily agreement; you need alignment. Obviously, we like it when we're in agreement, but not always going to agree. So just maybe speak into that for a moment of just like in the moments when the lead pastor, executive pastor, or lead pastor and some other ministry leader and director doesn't agree with vision and decision making, how they can take that disagreement that they have and get into alignment.
Yeah, well, that's part of conflict resolution. How do we resolve a conflict or a disagreement? Always remember, I always say to all staff, to all executive pastors, to everybody, it is never your job to replace what God's put in place. Second thing I always say to pastors and support staff or executive pastors is that more than one vision always creates division. And vision doesn't have to mean that you have some big old giant 5-year like the pastor wants to go here in the next 5 years, but I want to go here. Like that's pretty big and bold. But if it's like, well, the pastor preaches more topical, but I think we should be verse by verse. That's misalignment. That's going against the pastor. You may have that personal preference. You may say that to someone outside of the church, but you don't have those kind of conversations. And if there's misalignment happening, if there's disunity happening, misalignment, I think it opens the floodgate for the enemy to come in and do something. The Bible says don't give the enemy even a foothold. What's a foothold? It's like you shutting the door and I put my foot in there. Well, I can't get through there, but I got my foot in there. And the Bible tells us don't even let him get a foot in there. Don't even let a foot come in because that's what misalignment will do. That's what disunity will do. Now, we're going to disagree. But we come, we share it with respect, we share it with love, we share it with unity, and then we leave it in God's hands and we leave it in the pastor's hands. But all we do is we share it, and again, now we're not talking about anything that's blatantly wrong or morally wrong. We're not talking about stuff. We're just talking about like, hey, a decision on the building project, a decision on staffing, a decision on systems, a decision on a leader. Okay, if it's not morally, we're not talking about a moral issue, then it's, let me share with you my heart. Let me share you why I feel that way. But again, it's your decision. You choose it. I'll support you either way. And I think that's the way that it has to be. And if it's not that way, I think it's going to create some serious challenges because I think it opens up the floodgate for the enemy to come in and do something that we don't want him to do. So I think you have to be really careful in that area because I do think the enemy plays the long game.
Yeah.
And the long game is, man, a year, 18 months ago, I was a little frustrated every now and then. 12 months ago, I've been getting quite a bit frustrated, and we haven't resolved it. 8 months ago, I shared it with one of the board members, or I shared it with one of the staff, or shared it with someone in the church. 3 months ago, like all of us, it's just getting worse and worse and worse. If you don't deal with it over here, it'll show up over here. It always does. I always liken it to a crack in the cement of your driveway. You don't walk out and go, man, there's a crack in the cement, and then come out the next day, oh my gosh, it's gone. It never just goes away. You got to fix it. So if there's a crack happening in our heart, that's where the enemy gets in and starts widening that crack, and you've got to fix it. You can't let it keep going. No one can. It will turn into a problem eventually. The long game might be a year from now, might be 2 years from now, but it will end up being a problem, and it will cause damage. So you deal with it now and keep your heart right.
Yeah, that's so good. Such good stuff. So, no, I love it. And I mean, and we've even talked about this before, just in our one-on-ones, about that you can't be afraid to have those hard conversations. You can't be afraid. You can't steer away from them. And you got to be able to do it with love. And at the end of the day, obviously, if you've got that trust built in those relationships, then obviously you're for each other. You're not against each other when you have to be truthful and honest about some hard stuff. So. Yep.
And I think that's how you create the trust. You got to look at trust as a bank. You have to keep making deposits, and deposits sometimes take time, but deposits can be made in transparent conversations. Deposits can be made with our loyalty, with our attitude, with our heart, with our work ethic. Over and over and over again, we're making deposits where that person says, I can completely trust this person. You get to that point, and you have a much greater gateway to be able to say something. And you always want to be careful, on how you respond in front of people, in front of other people. One thing I always say is that when you give loyalty publicly, you get leverage privately. When you have loyalty publicly, you give leverage privately. When they know, hey man, that guy always has my back in front of anybody, it gives you leverage privately. Loyalty publicly will give you leverage privately, which is leverage being that not that you can take advantage of, but like, man, you can be honest and they'll receive it because they know you're always got their back. They trust you because they see it over and over again that you can be trusted. In loyalty, in people saying bad things, in your work ethic, and how much you get done, like all of it, like, man, I just if you keep delivering, the trust bank goes up, the equity goes up, and then it gives you solid relationship to have. And when that solid relationship, they're going to receive it so much more from you because the trust is so high. I don't receive a lot from a person I don't trust. I'm like, I don't know what their motive is. I don't know what they're saying. I don't trust them. But someone I completely trust, I really tune in. And even if they're my subordinate, I really tune in. So anyway,
That's
you find that
super
helpful?
Yeah, so good. So good. I appreciate the wisdom on it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Anything else on your mind today?
Yeah, no, I mean, I just, obviously I think that's such a huge relationship, especially in church growth, is being able to have just the right people in the right lanes, especially, the lead pastor being supported and not being just bogged down, in the everyday, because ministry is so busy, and the whirlwind of ministry can just, it can eat you up, And so just being able to have that support and having a healthy support system of somebody that can help to be like a visionary driver is so needed in ministry today. And I think it's also one that some people don't understand. So I appreciate you taking some time just to kind of talk about, that lead pastor, executive pastor, that relationship, especially the trust and what that looks like, I think is super helpful for a lot of people.
Absolutely. Well, awesome, man. I loved that you the response you gave. I love your heart. I love your desire to keep the church growing, and you've always got such an amazing heart. But man, thanks, Chad, for jumping on today's podcast. I really do appreciate it, buddy, and appreciate your heart, man. Keep up the amazing work.
Thanks, Pastor Chris. Appreciate you.
Okay, bud. Have a good day. Bye-bye.
You too.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with Pastor Chad. It was so deep and talking about staff tension and the pressures that can come in relationships. And I hope you got a lot out of it today. Want to remind you to check out churchboom.org. Sign up to be a part of the Church Boom Network. Everybody needs a network. We don't do church alone. And when you're part of the network, you get the opportunity to have private webinars and training programs. You get an opportunity to be part of a group that meets monthly on Zoom. You get another opportunity to be a part of an in-person gatherings. It's just a place to belong. Everybody needs a tribe, and we want to challenge you and encourage you to become part of the Church Boom Network tribe. So go to churchboom.org and check out the Church Boom Network, and we will see you next time on Fly on the Wall.